everyone. My name is Aruni Kashyap. I am a writer and translator. This is record. I'm speaking from Athens, Georgia right now.
Yeah, okay. My first book of poetry was published in 2008, Boki. Second came after quite some time in 2017, Cyber Proverbs, which was brought out by Poetry Wala. And various other articles, poems have been published in anthologies over this.
Sure. My first novel, Windhorse, was published in 2013, and that was based on the Tibetan resistance movement. My second novel, No Direction Rome, was a dark comedy, and it was published soon after in 2015. It's actually taken a while for me to work on my third novel, and I'm working on my third novel now, which is a dark comedy. I'm also working on a book of non-fiction set in Southeast Asia. And
Hi, my first book was a collection of short fiction called Next Door, published by Penguin India. And very soon after that was a novel called Rebirth, again a Penguin India novel. And then a long gap of 10 years. And this year, right before lockdown, I chose this year, right before lockdown, to bring out the next book, a novel called Undertow. So it's just being released from lockdown as we speak.
Okay. Udipana?
Okay, so my first book was a collection of poems. So now I have two poetry collections, both from Authors Press in New Delhi. And I have an academic book, Conflict and Reconciliation, The Politics of Ethnicity in Assam, from Routledge. And I have a short story collection from Zuban, which is where actually the story that's in your anthology was first published. And then I also have a collection of folk tales from the Northeast, retold folk tales. So yeah, and I'm working on a couple of other things. So.
And I know that you guys are also working on many exciting projects. If you have time, I would love to quiz you on that. But thank you so much for joining us today here again. I am really thrilled. And the really funny thing about this panel is that we might as well have this panel in Assamese. And because we can, because we are all Assamese speakers, but in a true act of public service and generosity, so that others can understand us, I'm going to have this panel. We are having this panel in English. Okay. So the first question I wanted to ask is, I hope nobody ever asks me to pick which is my favorite story, because I love all the stories equally in this collection, and that will always be my answer. So please don't ask me. But I wanted to talk, each one of you to talk a little bit about your story, and the stories that all four of you have contributed. Obviously, what is common among all of us is that all of you write in English primarily, and the stories you have contributed are written in English. The book has a large number of translated stories from Bodo and Assamese, but your stories are in English. And that is one of the reasons I also yoked this panel together, because I thought we can ask some questions around that topic. But before that, can you tell me about how this story began? What was the genesis? What was the original idea? How did you work on it? So maybe I'm going to start in a reverse order. Maybe Udipana would like to go first. Your story is Colors, set in Guwahati. And it is kind of an experimental story. Udipana, are you here?
You just froze for me there. Could you repeat your question, please?
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about your story.
Okay. So this is a story which is very close to my heart, because this is where I'm exploring a theme which has been occurring over and over and over again in everything that I write and everything that I study, for that matter, as a scholar, right? So it's about the middleness of being. And, what do we do normally? How do we cope with life normally? We just settle for, the everyday things. And it's only when we are pushed that we rebel, right? So what makes us rebel? What makes us, get co-opted, right? What makes us not rebel, for that sense, for that matter, right? So, these are the things that I was thinking. It's a story about person who is a doctor, right, who grew up in a middle-class household like me, whose parents imposed on him their very limited ambitions, like all, most middle-class families have. But again, the question that comes up at the end of it is, can we escape that ever, no matter how much we try to, think that we are above and beyond it? Are we all really ever, free of those limitations that we set upon ourselves, if we can put it that way, right? So this doctor, he goes to work in a tea estate, and I grew up in a tea estate, so my mother's family lives there. So grew up in the sense, well, all summer vacations there and things like that, all cousins going there. So it's again something that is very close to me. And then there's this Boro village, which is near the tea estate, and how different ethnic groups come together, right? How they coexist, and what happens when suddenly, everything sort of blows up, right? So what happens when insurgency intrudes, right? So there's this scene in this story, which is again something that keeps haunting me: blood on yellow mustard flowers, right? So droplets of blood. And I think that is what our insurgency story has been in Assam for everybody, right? We want to live with the beauty of the mustard flowers, but we also have to face the reality of those droplets of blood all over them, right? So yeah, that was what it was. And like I said, this whole question of middleness, of being in the middle, right? Living in that condition is something that I'm also working on now for my next novel. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That's a really stark and very beautiful image, but at the same time, under the beauty of those beautiful mustard flowers is a bloody reality that you're exploring. Janeba, and I'm going to come to informal ways of addressing now, because that's how we always address. Janeba, tell me about Nirmala. She's this one woman who is torn between two sons. And in so many ways, the story of the conflict in Assam is about fratricidal conflict, right? Because we have the Alpha movement or the Alpha insurgency that broke into different factions. The Boro insurgency broke into so many factions. And in some ways, I feel that the home that Nirmala is inhabiting, is also a microcosm of what Assam is, or what Assam's history with insurgency has been. Maybe I'm reading too much because I'm an academic. You can tell me.
So this is what happened. Two things happened when you asked me to write for this particular collection. Is that I've always said for my other fiction, I've never taken insurgency as a centerpiece. I always write what I say from within a family, within a community, and I write about what happens to it. And for a lot of us in Assam, we were in the middle of this huge turbulence, but we were living our daily lives through it. I remember I was between the ages of 20 to 25, I was in medical college in Guwahati, and we had to deal with daily things such as our exams, our semester exams, our getting to college, getting back from college, births, weddings, funerals. Everything was happening around us, right? But at the same time, there was this big seething turbulence all around us, and a lot of us got stuck in it. We were sort of between two very strong pulls. So many of us have seen this, that within our family, we find one son has gone away and joined the insurgents, and the other son, and the other person, or the son or the family member, is perhaps working in the government. It's something which happened to me personally. My father was part of the government, part of the establishment. When he joined his service in government service, he's a very nationalistic-minded person, so it was for the nation, for India. And then lo and behold, 30 years down the line, there is this, from his own community, a separatist movement. So people would look at him and say, you're going to office, but you shouldn't. You should, picketing you can't go to office today, right? So I've actually been in this very strange incident in Uzan Bazaar in my grandfather's house near Barwari Temple. And my father was setting out to go to work, and my grandmother from Ugrotara, not the Barwari grandmother, was at the gate picketing with her gang of 40-year-old women and saying, "No, Basra, you can't go to work today." So I've actually seen it from both sides, and I wondered that these two conflicting pulls. And we did feel conflict. We felt for both sides, I think, at least I can say for myself. I saw their point of view, I saw the other point of view, I saw the futility of both points of view, I saw the futility of what was happening on the ground. And so when I sat down to write, I said, this is the area I would like to explore. And I anyway love to explore the world from within, from a family, from a community setup. And that's what I sat down to do with Nirmala. So Nirmala was literally pulled apart by these two conflicting loyalties.
Thank you. Kaushik, your story is, it's just so devastating, and I don't want to give any spoilers. I don't know how to talk about your story without giving any spoilers. But you are the author, so I'm going to let you sort of take over, and if you want to give spoilers, you're welcome. If you don't want to give spoilers, that's also fine. But I want to know, where was the inspiration? How did you end up writing this powerful story?
I think the inspiration, it comes from memory, and it comes from how I remember Guwahati and my time in Guwahati. Like all of us, I studied in Guwahati. I was in Don Bosco, then I was in Cotton College before I moved to Delhi for my higher education. And building on what Janvi said also, though there was a conflict raging all around us, in Guwahati at least, we also had all the normal trials and tribulations and the joys and heartbreak of adolescent life. It's around sort of slightly older adolescents, older adolescent boys that this story is set. And, they were going through, so I wanted to talk about the music, about the school shenanigans and the high school shenanigans that boys like us, sort of undertook in Guwahati. Of course, we were also privileged because Guwahati was a bubble and we were slightly safer from the conflict that was raging around Assam and in more remote areas or in other districts. And the boys that I'm talking about are broadly middle class, so also slightly secure in their privilege. But I wanted to talk about what happens when these lives intersect with the conflict that is an everyday part of their lives too. So in the first part of the story, I don't refer to the conflict at all, again, because I wanted it to be a late childhood, early adult, a young adult kind of tale. And the tension, and I wanted to build tension because there was, even in our daily sort of school adventures, misadventures, school romances, our sort of academic successes or failures, there was the backdrop of the violence. It affected us in tangential ways. We knew of neighbors, we knew of cousins, parents who were involved, and it was in our minds. And of course, all the boys want to migrate, want to move out, which, as we know, it was aspirational because we saw, at that point, we saw our community and our state as a community that had failed us, the middle class, and everyone wanted to move out for aspiration or out of disenchantment. So I built on that vibe. I built on the music. I built on a very snappy young language that I wanted to recreate, and then see what happens when they encounter the so-called other young men of the state, which is, the ones who joined the Alpha or those who later became Salfa. And there's emptier boys are Salfa. At some level, it's just young men, and they were mostly men who took up arms because they couldn't imagine other ways of dealing with the state or addressing societal problems. They could only find arms to deal with them. And so it's about what happens when these two worlds collide. And like you said, it does lead to a devastating end, but and unexpected. So which happened across the state.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah. For those who are watching this and are not from Assam or Northeast, Alpha is the United Liberation Front of Assam, and Salfa is Surrendered United Liberation Front of Assam. And this is the story of many of the insurgency movements in Assam, where insurgency movements start and then the government coaxes them, forces them, whittles them, brutalizes them into submission and create a group of surrendered militants. and they roam around the city with guns, and
Yes.
and then and do a lot of things that you don't want them to do. Probably, it's too much power vested on a certain group of people. I'm coming to Nitu. Nitu, I love your story, of course, but I loved the title of your story for so long that I actually wanted to name the anthology Chart Paper. Then I thought that it's I have to find a title that is more sort of all encompassing, but at the same time, in my mind, Chart Paper was the title, and I debated for a long time. And you also, I think, this is this is one of the first stories that I commissioned for the anthology. You're very generous. They're giving it to me, and it became possible because you, Udipana and Janiba, all of you actually gave your stories when I first started shopping around the concept. It is set against the Assam agitation, and it is told from the point of view of a child. Why a child, and how did you go about writing this story?
Thank you, Aruni. Actually, I wrote an essay first. It was called The Assam Agitation, Subjective History. And this essay was published in Blog Bharati in 2009. And at the time, Blog Bharati was a kind of blog aggregator where links were posted from various blogs all over the country. But they also had this spotlight series where they asked authors to talk about personal/political, autobiographical mostly, essays. So this essay, it was one of the part of the spotlight series. And when Aruni, you read the essay, you said, why don't you turn it into a story? The essay was published in 2009, and Aruni, I checked my mails today. You wrote to me in 2010, and you had attached the call for submissions, and you also suggested that perhaps the essay that you had written could be converted into a short story from the perspective of this little girl. It was actually your suggestion, I was surprised because I'd forgotten about it. I'd forgotten that it was your suggestion, because this is like more than 10 years ago. And then I wrote it, and the most difficult part of writing the story was, how do I fictionalize something that was more or less autobiographical, even though I don't really believe in the factuality of the autobiography, because autobiographies are fictional, as all of us know. And so the story, the process of turning an essay into a short story was what I struggled with for a long time. And then also I asked several of my friends, not several, maybe 3-4 of my friends, how should I go about, people who are prose writers, because most of you are prose writers. A couple of you, Aruni and Udipana, you straddle both worlds, but I am primarily a poet. So prose, when I do try prose, it comes to me with great difficulty, and it, for want of a better term, the few fictional pieces that I've written are magic realist in nature. So this primarily, again, for want of a better term, social realist story, where I had to follow kind of sequencing, kind of rational, stick to the narrative. I found all that very difficult, because I always feel that one can lie better in poetry. One can't really lie so much in prose. I mean that's a poet's perspective, I guess. So anyway, finally, when I wrote the story, I had to, I picked up certain things that had actually happened, like the pencil stub, the hollow of the pen, etc. Those are things that actually happened, and then the protest march on the banks of the Brahmaputra. And school closing, not really have anything to do. Our school closed, St. Mary's closed, and being given holiday homework suddenly. All those things were part of reality, but then they had, these things had to be kind of fitted into a more fictional space, a fictional domain, as it were. The story is close to me because I've written very few short stories, but close to me because because again, it deals with the haziness of memory, and also because I think there are two short stories, Kaushik's and mine, both which kind of happen around the Uzan Bazaar area, and that's also part of who I am, who I used to be. The Brahmaputra, the rickshaw ride by the banks of the Brahmaputra, the Lota Hill, people congregating in Lota Hill. All these are so much a part of who we are, who we used to be, and there's no getting rid of that. So that's the history of that.
Thank you. That's very beautifully said, and thank you for sharing also your writing process. In fact, that was my next question, but I wanted to shift gears a little bit because this really interesting question came to my mind. We are all from Guwahati, and we grew up there before we moved to different bigger cities. For most of us here, it is Delhi. I think for Janiba, you lived in Delhi for a while. Is that right?
In school, yes.
Yeah, and then, but we have spent our early years in Guwahati, have maintained strong connection, but we had our education, formal education, at least from college or in university, and then we have worked elsewhere. When we grew up there in Assam in the 80s and 90s, we really think actually that because we grew up with a normalized sense of fear. So as a result, we don't really know that our childhoods, our experiences are actually different. So there's always a moment, when you come to Delhi, when you go to Bombay and move there, and you realize that, damn, this is different. These guys are having a very different kind of childhood, and our childhood is different. For me, that moment was, I think it was when I first went to Delhi for admissions. I really saw that people's, all these major newspapers, their front page headlines were soaring prices in electricity. Somebody has said something. Vegetable prices, petrol prices have gone up. There's a local murder that has happened. These are the things that were the front page. And most of my front pages were like, gun battles, 10 people killed, massacres, rapes, bomb blasts. This is what has happened. Most of the time it was brutal, gruesome, and they were part of breakfast conversations. Literally, we are having tea and we are discussing, should we go out today? Will there be an Assam burn? So if the Assam burn happens suddenly. So this normalized sense of fear, but at the same time, we live with it and we accept it as normal, because it happens every day and becomes so banal. But then we move out. There's a moment always, for me, it was watching the newspaper headlines. So I wanted to know what was that moment for each one of you when you realized that, we have a very different kind of childhood, and we have made it. We have still survived this. Maybe Neeti, you can go first.
You asked me?
Yeah, would you like to go first? Yeah.
A different kind of childhood. The story chart paper actually starts with the wailing, the howling of the hukukua that we used to hear from across the river, and that's a memory that it's a nightmare actually, which stays with me. I mean, it's a recurring nightmare, much like mathematics exams and homeopathy exams too. So these nightmares, they become a part of who we are, because how do you look back upon something? You look back upon something only as a kind of nightmare, So that's really sad, because one of the memories that stay with me about the Assam agitation, which is about Nelly, of course, and the memory is that people have gathered. It's Nelly has just happened. People have gathered. People are outside, and they're saying, even though it's winter and the sandbanks are out, but people are saying that Bangladeshi women's breasts have been cut off and they're floating on the river. And this, sometimes I think I shouldn't have heard this because it's such a frightening memory, actually. That you think of a disembodied woman, a woman who is actually no longer a woman, and a body part by which you would know her as a woman, has been just severed, and that is not part of my story, but it's there in my memory and it's there in the essay. And this, that moment when you realize that this is not going to go away, this past is never going to be erased. That's because as soon as I left Guwahati, I was in JNU, and JNU was in those days a very safe place. It was like a little village. It was like a little village, and we didn't even go out to Munirka for months together. So that's the safety of this ivory tower academia, where you're only talking about very this highfalutin theories and not really in touch with the real world. You're not in touch with Munirka. You are JNU all by yourself. This really perfect ivory tower where we are only dealing with thoughts of a certain kind, intelligence of a certain kind, and but the realization is that this is perhaps not who I am, and that's a feeling that stays with me. It's still with me. That feeling that I will always be an outsider. There is no way that I can belong to any particular space.
That's so well said, Janiba. By the way, Neetu, for me it was math as well. I was terrified of maths. Janiba?
So I think I was a little bit older during the insurgency. I was already in medical college, and I think I was an intern already. So as an intern, we posted to our wards, we posted to the casualty emergency ER. And at that time, I thought it was normal, but not once, but on several occasions, we have been called to duty. There's been a bomb blast. And where do the victims come? To GMC, right? So we've been in the thick of limbs, no limbs, people shattered by bombs, heads blown off, legs lost. And we took it in our stride. We thought that, because it was a long conflict, right? So we thought this was how life was. After my MBBS, I came into Bangalore to do my MD, my house job in MD, in a very, again, excellent center of excellence, St. John's Medical College, and where the biggest sort of emergency would be a cardiac arrest or a road traffic accident, one patient at a time. And I'm sitting there in comfort and wondering, my goodness, I mean, never in their lifetimes will these doctors see what we went through in GMC. And we took it for granted and we took it as the normal, but was it normal? I kind of relive those things sometimes.
Exactly. Udipana?
Yeah, I just went back to those days, right? So Kaushik and Nituva's stories about young kids, school kids in those days. I remember what we were told walking back, because I used to walk back from school every day. So my parents would always be like, when you walk back, if there's an army convoy passing, do not look up. Right? I did not know why at that time, but as we grew older, as we read about Raju Borua, as we read about all those different women who were raped and killed, I realized why, right? So at that time we did not know, but that fear of the security forces that we felt, and we used to hear all these stories, and uncle of mine, somebody, a distant uncle, was captured, taken to the army camp, tortured, and he and in fact this is something that I have again fictionalized in one of my stories, right? So he was tortured in the army camp. When he was being put on the pyre, there was not a single bone intact in his body, right? So these are the things we grew up with. And then I came to Delhi, and I was studying in IP College, Indraprasth College, where Nituva teaches. And my roommate there happened to be the daughter of this army officer who was posted in the Northeast, right? He was one of the topmost officials there. And she, till this day, she is my best and I think only friend from IP who I'm in touch with, and who, she's among my best friends, right? So, and when I first started talking to her, I felt very weird because I was connecting to her. She was, this is a normal human being. But then her father was posted there, and I met her father, who was like this, wonderful uncle, right? So I did not know how to reconcile the two. And till this day, the one thing that stands out to me in my entire relationship with her was 26th January, right? A beating retreat. And she was like, we have to go there. Every time I go there, I have these goosebumps when I see these soldiers marching. And I'm like, oh God, I have goosebumps for different reasons, you know? So we are from two such different worlds. And yeah, and yet we're the best of friends. So this is something that's very difficult to reconcile. And I think it can only be reconciled in fiction or poetry. Not in scholarship. I have tried doing that in my academic writing, but it has not happened till date. But I have my hopes up. Yeah.
I mean, those are such amazing tensions when I'm writing this novel.
As soon as I have some time. Yeah.
Okay, Kaushik, your turn.
Yeah, well, I think in my case, also like all of us, my childhood was very atypical from a non-Assamese childhood, and particularly so because my father was in the police, so he was in the security forces. So growing up, and if you're in the police and you're Assamese from Assam, you're sort of torn between two worlds. You have a lot of empathy for what's happening and for the different communities and the struggles, but you're also torn with your duty. But it's a world of conflict. You're in the heart of the conflict. So growing up, seeing guns, hearing news of casualties, of people being killed, of colleagues being killed, was normal. It was part of everyday life. Through the 90s, it was part of everyday life. And I think at that time, even in middle class Assam or even in middle class India, we didn't have words for that. We didn't know that we were all a generation going through some kind of trauma. No one knew what words like trauma or PTSD, etc. meant, including people who are insurgents, people who are in the forces, a lot of whom are doing their jobs but caught up between the state and the insurgents. And a lot of these memories just were never resolved for generations. But I think coming to Delhi and you and I, we would have had a similar experience in Delhi since we went to the same college. We were in St. Stephen's, where, you come to the hostel and you find people with completely normal, of course, we're also very privileged compared to most of India, obviously, in many senses. But in St. Stephen's, we came across fellow classmates who had completely sheltered normal lives. Privileged boarding schools or other cities. And you suddenly realize that all you've gone through is very abnormal, and you often end up not even talking about it. I don't know about you, if you're Assamese and you come to Delhi, you try to fit in, you do everything you need to fit in, and not to take anything away from the people we meet, who are all generous, warm people, and we manage to fit in. But in the back of your mind, you know that your background and your history wasn't the same, and eventually you carry it with you. And you resolve it in your own way, I guess. Everyone ends up resolving it somehow or the other. But there's no formal resolution to the memories that generations in Assam and across the Northeast carry with them. Maybe now the language is evolving and people can do it.
Absolutely. There is no formal resolution. That's very beautifully said. With me, it was a little different because we were kind of outsiders in the city. We never owned a house until 2001, and my father was very sort of wary of buying an apartment. We always call it Jikhalaba, which is matchbox. So me and my mother completely were against it. My father was somewhat with it. So we couldn't bring ourselves to buy property, and we always had sort of strong roots. We spent a lot of time in the villages. My father is from, and my other relatives are from. We're very close to my second and third cousins. I have scores of cousins, and I'm actually still in conversation with them on the phone even now during the pandemic. So it's a little weird. So I had very, very strong connection with the village. But I remember one of the earliest memories of insurgency was when Dada had Ahise. The bhaiyas have come, the boys have come. Because suddenly, you are home, you are enjoying, and a group of men comes with guns and say, "We want to eat here today." And obviously, because they came with a sense of entitlement as well, and then, so please kill that duck, please get us fish. They're not going to have just dal and rice. So that was my earliest memory of insurgency, actually. And obviously I was very young. It was the early 90s, and I used to go and peep at the room where they were given to sleep. It was then I realized that something is going on, but looking back at it, obviously I managed to contextualize it, and it is not that black and white. But this is getting very deep and heavy. I think we need another panel to just sort of share our memories of growing up in Assam under the violence and how we sort of survived it. We are all survivors in some ways. I wanted to come into something very interesting, which is also the thread that binds this little panel, which is that we all write in English. I also write primarily in English, but I also write in Assamese. I started writing a lot more in Assamese now. But predominantly, English is our common language. We have sort of gained whatever credibility from our writing, but at first by writing in English. My story is a little different because I used to write in Assamese in my undergraduate, but people know me as an English writer because my Assamese writing is not translated. What does it really mean to be a writer who writes in English but from Assam? And this is a question that I keep thinking about. And people tell me, "Oh, you also write in Assamese, so so it doesn't apply to you." Sometimes they say it applies to me. Sometimes people say really these dismissive things, they want to earn a lot of money. I mean, I wish that was true. And sometimes people say things like, oh, they're looking for cheap popularity. I mean, I don't know what that means, but I would love some cheap popularity, more likes on Instagram, more followers on Twitter, more subscribers. And then I can become an influencer by I'll just show a brand and get some money, I would love that popularity. But I wanted to know, what kind of responses you have heard, if at all, or what does it really mean to write in English and about Assam when you're from Assam? Because you don't necessarily have to write only about Assam, but if you're from Assam, speak Assamese, and you're writing in English, what does it really mean? What are the problems that come with it? What are the consequences of that? Who would like to go first? Maybe Udipana, you can go first.
Okay. So writing in Ohomia versus writing in English. I mean, I also write in Ohomia, although I don't do it as often now as I would like to. But I feel even when I'm writing in English, I'm actually writing in Ohomia, because that's me, that's who I am. I'm just using a different language to express me, right? So in that sense, I'm a cultural translator. I'm translating my culture for another audience, and about people's reactions to that, reactions coming out from Assam. I must say I have never, ever, never come across anybody who has had problems with me writing in Assamese, in English, sorry. So, I've always had people really appreciating what I write and requests for translations, because I think that is what we do as English, Ohomia English writers, or English Ohomia writers, however you want to put it. That's what we are doing. We are translating our experiences for an audience who have not known about us, who have not heard about us. We are just trying to express ourselves in different ways, right? So I've done a lot of translations from Ohomia to English. I have written in English, right? So all of that, I think, boils down to the same thing, that we are just trying to be heard. We are just presenting ourselves to the world, right, as who we are. And it does not put us apart from the world. It does not make us, different from, it does not set our experiences apart from other, people who are in similar situations, similar insurgency or conflict-ridden situations. It just aligns us with the rest of the world. So I think it's a way of us aligning ourselves with the rest of the world. That's been my experience.
Thank you. Janeba?
So I'll give you the background to this whole writing in English, writing in Assamese.
Please.
Unlike the rest of you, I left Guwahati in class 4. I went to Delhi much earlier. My father was posted to Delhi, so I left in class 4, came back in class 10. So while I did the initial, in any case, I was in St. Mary's Convent, a convent school. And again, there people say, why convent school, this medium, that medium, the new policy, right? Education policy again about studying in your local language. And I feel our parents didn't really make a conscious decision that we'll put them in this medium, that medium. The good schools were run by Jesuits and by Catholic nuns, and we were just put there. It was kind of default thinking. There wasn't a conscious choice against any medium, right? So I left, I learned the basics of Assamese alphabet, I learned what we learn up to class 3, and I went off to Delhi where I had to learn Hindi. It's a CBSE system, and I'm fluent in Hindi. So if it's Indian language, I can write an essay, I can read, I can keep literature in Hindi. What my maternal grandmother did, my Aita from Ugrotara, said that I'll be writing to you. She was also a writer, she was a poet, she had a Lekika Kumaros in her house, and she was very involved in that community. She said, I'll be writing to you letters, my dear, and you'll have to read and you'll have to write back. So get that basic link, so I can read a newspaper, I can read a letter, I can write a letter, but I cannot translate, I cannot write a novel in Assamese, although I'd love to. Second thing is when I began writing, I was in Bangalore for almost 10, 15 years, 20 years onwards. So I'm writing from outside Assam, right? I began to write, and my experience was that the first collection of short stories, Next Door, was reviewed in Doinik Janambhumi by an Assamese poet, not by a writer in English, not by an Assamese writer in English, by a senior poet who wrote in Assamese. And he said that I was skeptical. He met my mother and said I was skeptical, wondering what this girl would be writing from Bangalore in English about us. And I was worried and I wanted to see what she did. He said, I've read the book and she's writing about us. She's writing Assamese stuff and it's okay. And it's a good book, you know. So I got that support and that endorsement. And what Udipana said really resonates because we also need a section of us writing in English to be that bridge with what they call the mainland, with the rest of the world. Not just translations, mind you, because writing in Assamese and translated writings come from a slightly different place, have a slightly different flavor. Those of us who are writing in English in the first hand and have enough know the subtleties, can reach her, we can represent our state. And I always say that look at us as part of your writing community. We are kind of ambassadors to a different region as such. I feel proud actually in Bangalore. I've been writing for a long time and I've kind of put our Indian our writings in English from Assam onto the map, so much so that my maid was very thrilled, my domestic help was very thrilled one day. We had this Ugadi, which is their sort of Bihu, right? At the same time, on Mag Bihu time, we have Ugadi. So normally you would have the Kannada film actresses, you'd have a couple of writers. So one day Times of India brought this whole crew home and said, we need you. Get into a mekhela, take out a horai, put stuff on it. And there I was next to Priyanka Upendra, who's one of the biggest film actresses here. My mate lost it. Why? Because I've been writing. I've been saying, Tenga, mekhela. Everyone here in Bangalore now know it, but in them days too, it's like a part of the lingo, you know. So I feel proud that this section of us, are a kind of bridge from that part of the world to this part of the world. I don't feel guilty, and like Udipana said, I've only actually felt support from the people back in Assam.
I have to say that, when I wrote my first novel, much before the English media picked it up, reviews, interviews were solicited from Assamese magazines and Assamese news channels. They're all on YouTube. Anybody can go and watch them. And this came out much before any review came out in English. And I really was really surprised because I think in the rest of the country, if you're an Indian English writer, you are mostly vilified. But in Assam, we get a lot of support generally, and I was delighted by that. Hadin did a full page interview, which is the largest weekly in Assam. Then Hathori had a very long essay about the novel. Almost every satellite channel had a primetime interview with me, and this is without a publicist, without me going to sort of, any of these media houses to seek support. They just say, "Oh, we heard about your novel. Please come talk about it," And it was really I was really delighted. I felt an amazing amount of support from the Assamese language media, which absolutely means a lot for me actually. Neetu, we have been discussing this on WhatsApp a little bit. That writing in English or writing in Assamese, these are not conscious choices. These are also very subconscious choices, right? So, or it's not that we consciously choose to write in English because here are our goals, A, B, C, Ds. Is that right? Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that? And then I'll come to Kaushik.
Yeah. I because we've been talking about our childhoods, I did not come to English from a position of power. I was the first girl in my family who was sent to, as Janavi said, an English medium school. And everybody speaks in Assam back home. Nobody speaks in English. So this, this whole idea of English being somehow up there and, something aspirational is something that, I've thought about for a long time, especially since, it's been, almost 23 years that I've been teaching English in the University of Delhi, in one of the colleges where Uddipana was the first batch I ever taught in IP. And so this is a question I think of quite often. What has this language done to us? And even though I say that I came to English as with the sense of alienation, but I felt even more alienated with Assam. You guys may not agree, but I've always felt like somehow that that this language, this linguistic space, class, caste, whatever term you may want to use for it, I've never felt that I belonged, in that particular space. And this alienation, this estrangement, whatever term you want to use for it, is something that stays with me. Even when I translate, I do some translation, not as much as I would like to, but I translate from Assamese to English, only short fiction. When I translate, it is not so much about taking the story to a larger audience, but more about trying to have a conversation with the person I'm trying to translate. Like I translated Joy Hoyka, who is part of this anthology, and it was like having a conversation with this young writer. What is he actually thinking? What is his idea of Assam? And that's also one of the reasons why I have this soft spot for Hoyka, because I feel that same kind of conflict, same kind of not knowing, and not really being able to place myself very clearly either here or there. I think that's it.
No, that's very beautifully said, and I think that sentence, where you said, "I don't come from English from a position of power," resonates with me so deeply, because I'm still the only English speaker in my entire family and clan and whatever. Because my father has 8 brothers and sisters. Most of them are no more. They have numerous cousins. I have about 21 first cousins, if I'm not wrong, or 19. And we are very close, as I said, along with the second cousins. I'm the only English speaker. Nobody reads English. Except my father, because he knows the language, but he never really speaks in English unless he has to in official situations. So for me, my parents and my family sending me to an English medium school was actually aspirational, but at the same time, because my mother was a novelist in Assam, and my father and mother both have studied Assamese literature formally and earned PhD degrees on it. So they made sure that I read Assamese there. But at the same time, I read Assamese, I read Hindi, and I read Bangla when I was growing up. More so Bangla. And that gave me a much more sort of comfort with different languages. And for me, it has never been a big question whether writing in English is a big deal for me or difficult for me. It's just that it comes naturally to me, depending on the story and the voice of the character that I listen to. So it's always a subconscious choice. And I think people find it hard to believe. I was recently interviewed by an Assamese writer in Assamese, and I said, it's like living in Ghost. If the character is telling me the story in Assamese, that's what I do. That's why my Assamese novel, Noikonatia Durod, and the 3 other novellas I have written in Assamese, they are all written in Assamese because I heard the story in Assamese, because the characters told me the story in Assamese. It's just so mysterious how the writing process works for me, that, and I think it's for others as well. It's hard for me to say why I chose this language or that language. So I really love that sentence that you said. You don't come to English from a position of power. That's really, really important to remember. Kaushik, I want to come to you. What do you have to say? We have had already a very interesting discussion about writing in English.
I think in my case, it wasn't much of a question growing up or during my sort of school or the formative years, so to say, because being a writer or being in the literary sphere wasn't an aspiration for me. Through school or university, I mean, I studied economics. I did a master's. I came back and I was doing a regular job. I would write the occasional short story, but I wasn't literary, so to say, to use that broad term in university, like a lot of writers usually are. I stumbled upon writing with Windhorse when I met the gentleman who was the inspiration for Windhorse. So of course I always read widely, which is the case with most people who take up writing, unless you. So I read widely, and I would write the occasional short story or poem. And so writing came to me in the form, writing as a serious activity or as a craft came to me in the form of a story that was not from Assam. So it was also kind of different. I was accessing Windhorse as a foreign tale, and English was the language. English would have been my preferred language anyway, because I studied Assamese in school all the way to metric, but I studied in English, though I was very comfortable in Assamese, sort of spoken Assamese, and I could read, not very well now, but I could read at that point. So I could access Tibet only through the people I met. I actually started learning a bit of Tibetan when I went into the archives and started reading about the background and the context. So writing came to me first, and it came to me through a foreign tale. So English was the only tool I had. And so I know this sounds kind of blasé, and of course it's from a position of privilege, because I had the tool ready with me. I had the language ready with me because I had all these years of education and access to literature. It didn't strike me that I should write about Assam or speak for anyone, which is also the freedom that a writer has. A writer should, can speak for himself or herself and not take on the responsibility of speaking for others, if he or she wishes, of course. But, we have to be aware of our position. We have to be aware of whoever we're speaking on behalf of. In my case, it was speaking on the topic I'd chosen. So I wanted to make sure I did enough consultations, enough interviews, cross-check with my contacts, and that Windhorse came out well. And sorry, that's a different perspective. So it never struck me, and I haven't written about Assam. This is the first story that I published about Assam. It's also, of course, a function of the fact that though I grew up there, I've always looked outward, which sounds bad, but that is the way it is. I've looked outwards, and I've always been very curious, and sort of I have an obsession. When I stumble upon a topic, I have an obsession with researching it and writing about it and learning about it. And they've just happened to be other topics. I do want to return to Assam at some point, maybe in the next book or the one after that. And then I'll tackle the question even more seriously. I don't know if that sounds reasonable to you.
No, absolutely. I don't think anyone should apologize for writing in English or not writing about Assam. I mean, look at Debendranath Chatterjee. He wrote a novel set in Burma, Jongam. And Bhupen Hazarika has, written songs set in different places around the world, or different topics around. But Bhupen Hazarika is not really the best example. For example, Nogal has a novel set in a travelogue set in the United States. Lina Pharma has a novel set in the United States. I think nobody has to sort of say that I don't think that a writer from Assam needs to always write about Assam, and at the same, you don't need to apologize for writing in English. But I have been on the other hand, I have been on the other hand, very interestingly, because I think I'm much more connected to the Assamese language literary world, because I write in Assamese, and a lot of them are my close friends, or not close friends, but I know them. I think that's why I'm much more engaged on a day-to-day, on a much more day literary culture. So I have been told repeatedly, Ahomor kotha likhisa kintu bhal kotha likhiba, like insurgency kotha likhile amar naam hoy. So which means translates fine insurgency, it creates a bad name for Assam, as if nobody knows about it. So this is really, these things about the representational expectation that people have when writing English are very interesting. And I say, I don't write. I don't do any Assam's Pratinidhitya. I'm not Priyanka Chopra. You know, she was paid to
Yeah.
She has paid me to represent Assam. I'm not going to represent Assam. I'm going to represent my thoughts. You know, and that may be about 19. You know, like that may be about 11th century Mayon. And you cannot say that this is what you should be writing about. Udipana, you wanted to make a comment? Please go ahead.
No, just adding on to what Kaushik was saying and what you endorsed, that we should not be apologetic about writing what we write about, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I think if more Assamese writers, and in Assamese, when I say Assamese writers, I mean both Assamese writers who write in Assamese and those who write in English, right? I think more of us should be writing about, should be more outward looking, right? And that was what I think the founding fathers are, you know, older generation of Assamese writers, they really wanted that to happen, but with all the insurgency and the conflict happening, our world just became so constricted. But I think now it's time for us to look outward again and open up, you know.
Well, my Assamese novel is set in Minnesota. Okay, so there's hardly Assam there, but he does think about Assam. And come on, what are we talking about? Indira Goswami, Mamuni Baido, Mamuni Rasam Goswami. Yeah. How many of her novels are set in Assam? Most of her novels are set outside Assam. Come on, you know, Amamuradhara Toruwa, Korkut. Oh God! And now I'm turning this into an Assamese language panel. So we'll backtrack, you know, because
I think.
Yes, Kaushik, go ahead.
If I may add a point, I think what we need to avoid, one is, of course, whichever language you write in, we need to be aware of where we come from and the privilege we may have, and not or use it responsibly. So even if I write in English, whether it's about Assam or another community, to use that position responsibly. And the second point I'm very wary of, in my writing is, maybe English is the language, it's the functional tool, but to make sure that in using English, I don't view another part of the world through the hegemonic worldview of New York or London. You know, often we access, I don't want to access, now I'm in Southeast Asia and I want to write on Cambodia and Laos, in fact, but I want to access it directly, you know, as an Assamese or a boy from Uzan Bazaar, Don Bosco, or however you want to, I would describe myself, but not through the Guardian or the New York Times. You know, I wouldn't want to access them. I'd like to see if there are linkages with Northeast India, or with the broader Southeast Asian region, and not see if something can be translated into a global, metaphor. Yes. So I just want to use the language, but not use the hegemonic worldview that comes with the language.
Thank you for saying that. Two very short questions. This is not a chat show, but I just thought that I will use the format of a chat show. Two questions that I want all of you to respond very quickly. The first one is, which story among all four of you that apart from your story, which is your favorite story written by this group of people right now here? So maybe Kaushik, you can comment on somebody else's story and say why you liked it very quickly.
I wouldn't pick favorites. I actually managed to read just two because I hadn't seen the manuscript earlier. I read Janvi Baz and Nitu's story. I'm not being diplomatic, but I love both for different reasons. You know, Janvi Baz because of the reasons that you stated, which is that there's a slow. I think there's something for me that I could learn from both. In the Vigil, there's the slow uncoiling of tension. This sort of slow, gentle exploration of the relationships, which is a style that I found very striking. And it's not my style, so I also know that mine is very different. But one can always learn from different styles and approaches. So that I found very striking. And Nitu's short story I found very striking because of the point of view and how beautifully that was done. Right from the first sounds that the story starts with, the hukoa of the wolves, So that I found really striking because you are transported immediately into the world of the young child. And actually, Udipana Baz, I haven't read it yet, so I need to read it. But of course, I've read a lot of her writing previously, and some have stayed with me for a long time, such as your Kafila piece on Nelly and impunity, which really changed my worldview or changed my view on how I see Assam and the decades that have gone past.
Kaushik, you're so diplomatic. You were just being a good boy.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I don't have the anthology with me, and you only sent me the PDF last night at 11. So I did not have a chance to read any of these stories.
Sorry.
But these are writers that I have read forever, and I would love to read more and more and more. Nituba's poetry, I've been reading your poetry since Boki, right? And that one poem about scaling the fish, I don't know, that somehow just, said, how to scale a fish. That's just stayed with me. And I don't know, for some reason, it just takes me back to Zanbazar. It takes me back to Magh Bihu Uruka mornings when we used to go to the ghat to buy fish. I know that wasn't your intention, but, in that poem maybe, but that's what stays, that's where it takes me.
Yeah, I read some of the stories. I read all your stories. I loved all of them. I'm not going to pick and choose. I liked how Kaushik used memory. I also like, I don't think I've really read a story about Zanbazar in this way. The way music is brought in, which again took me back, and Bellevue, kind of space which stays with me, and also the fact that memory is so, you can't really fix it. You can't really say that this is the narrative that has to be privileged, and this is the story. This is the way I'm going to tell the story. I like the fact the way it moves back and forth. Jahnavi, of course, she's such an old hand. I don't really think that's the right term, but anyway, she's so good at it. Can clearly create space, a mise en scène with very few words. The economy of the way she uses language is wonderful. I was in fact taken back. I was reminded of Mashweta Devi's Hazar Chaurasima when I read her story. The way the mother actually thinks of her son. It's very beautifully done. I like the slowness, the way the woman's aches and pains are actually brought to the surface. And Uddipana, I like the way small little bits of poetry, or the way the quotations start the story. I hope I'm not giving away any spoilers, but I also like the way how the protagonist is so somehow detached from everything that happens around him. It's like he says, I'm going to change, I'm going to move away from my mother, I'm going to do something, but he actually doesn't really participate in this doing, in this act of doing, which is what I really liked about Dipana's story. That there is a sense of wanting to do something, but the inability to actually take that to fruition. So that's about your stories. I also liked, I already said I like Joyanto's story. I also, there's this portion in Sanjeev Paul Dekka's story where he talks about, taking Mokbul back to Qasim's home and then just leaving him there and not really thinking about him again. And when he goes there, he can only see ashes. So I thought that bit actually, there's a kind of conversation. It's just a little snippet. It's just a digression in the story, but it kind of connected, of course, Hafiz Ahmed's story. I really found that. I read that even before the book was out. It was out in, I think, Scroll, right? So I read that.
Yeah, thank you.
Not
So much.
the anthology, but earlier.
Thank you.
Story.
Thank you so much.
So I've read the whole book twice through. So I got the book.
Oh, good student.
I got it.
Yeah, that's good.
100 A+.
As soon as Aruni told me, I just picked it up and of course went through every story meticulously. And then when he talked about this panel discussion, went through it all over again. And I love all of them, right? But then I'm going to disobey you, Aruni, and talk about all three for my fellow writers.
You get extra credit for it.
I worked so hard for it. So for Neetu and Kaushik's story, the first thing that seized me was Uzanbazar. And although I never lived there, both my grandparents' house was there. Kaushik lived in one of them. He's my uncle's son. And for me, Guwahati was Uzanbazar. And I think that's a blessed area. We have the Gurdwara temple, we have the river flowing right there, we have Lota Hill Field, we have the Fight Boat, Digoli Pukri, we have the Sanasurwala outside Handi College. It's a blessed area, right? So that really seized me instantly. But the Kaushik story, what he said, this young energy of young boys up to mischief against a background of such intense turbulence. But like we discussed, they were going through their normal adolescent fun and anxieties against his background. And he uses the Bellevue section so beautifully, uses music so beautifully. So that really attracted me. And Nitu's story, I love the child's point of view. And when I examine my own work, some of you may have noticed, I use children a lot. In Next Door, my first story, the third story, everything is from a child's point of view. Because all of us know it's such a unique point of view. It's so unbiased, it's so honest, it's so fair. So when you want to express something clearly, you can use that voice so beautifully, which she does. I love this child, Moina, looking at, and another thing that struck me about the story was it was from within a household, which is what I love. I love to explore the world from within a household. A lot of people are a little laugh at it, but hey, you don't have to write about wars and politics and elections. You can examine the world from within a kitchen or a drawing room, and it can be as valid and as important an examination, right? So I love the way Moina, through Dani Pehi, through her kuras, through the neighborhood, through the protest march, the Lota Hill Field, examines this very unique situation. Udipana was just beautiful, so poetic, because the way you divide the sections into colors and that little bit of poetry in the beginning, and I love that, man. I think by nature, all of us artists are that kind. We're not like A-tag achieving personalities. We've always had this bit of, I want to do something different. Do I really have to be a doctor? Do I really have to achieve that? And I love the way he actually manages to do things to his own diktat quite well, right? I mean, he becomes a doctor, then he goes to a faraway tea garden, lives the artist life, but then, of course, reality catches up, which he did with him in the end without giving away anything. I love them all. I could go on about all the rest, about Koli Puran and everything, but there's no time for it today. And this is a really important anthology, Aruni. Well done, really. And I'm so glad it's doing the circles, it's being read, it's out there. I see that beautiful cover everywhere. It excites me. Also because it's such a complex area. For example, look at this. We're from the Northeast. This is an anthology about the Assam insurgency, right? So already we become a subsect. Within that, we're talking about Ruzan Bazar. Hey, we made another small subsect, you know? So it's so complex. And what Kaushik said about our father being in government and his father being in the police put us actually in a very awkward situation sometimes. We saw deep divided loyalties. So it's so complex there, that the identity of India, the identity of Assam, the identity of us as writers in English or Assamese, and what subject are we choosing? I write a lot about Bangalore now because it's another landscape for me, right? So many questions are thrown up by this anthology, and I've said it in a couple of my posts that to really understand the complexity of this problem, it's very hard to just say what's happening there, you want to leave India. It's not as simple, but please read fiction to get those little subtle insights, and this is a fantastic place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, finally, to sort of to exactly and echo what you said, you know, it's fiction that actually tells us these subtle problems, you know, where you cannot actually fix things into this black and white that our currently social media friendly world wants us to fit. Everything, you know, everything is not black and white. Everything is not stark the way, you know, the current conversation you know, in the world is going towards. It's there are so many gray areas, and to think of it that I only had budget for 15 stories and I got so many stories, so many submissions, so many I translated. There are 5 more very good stories that I couldn't take, and I feel my heart breaks for them. But I do want to take out an Assamese anthology, an Assamese version of this anthology, and because most of the stories are in already translated to Assamese, even the Bodo stories are, if I'm not wrong, available in Assamese. And you know, I think then I can have probably 50 stories in the anthology. So because then I can, you know, I can ask my Assamese publisher and fight with him and cajole him, bully him, give him a beer, and make him include 50 stories. I think when we're working with a large publisher, as we know, there are strict budgets and strict planning, which is done far ahead. So we have to stick to that. So yes, there are 15 stories, but this is just a very, very sort of sneak peek to what is out there. Quickly, it's like a rapid fire round. Why should people read this anthology? Kaushik.
Because you've captured diverse voices, from stories in Boro to Hafiz Ahmed's story to people who have written in English. Assam is seen as a unidimensional conflict, but as we know, it went through a lot of churn, and communities turned on the state, they turned on each other. So there was a lot of violence, and the narratives are fragmented depending on where you approach those years from. And I think you've, at least in your choice of authors and the story themes, you have captured that very well. And I intend to read the whole collection as soon as, starting tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. So actually, I could not finish talking about the other stories earlier. So I'll just quickly do that because I already spoke about Nituba's stories, but Janubeba stories, your writing, I have been always a huge fan of that, and if nothing, that should be the reason that people read this anthology, and all the rest of you, of course. And in fact, what Janubeba was saying a little while back, approaching these stories from within the household, right? From within, or as Kaushik was saying, from different perspectives, from individual specific stories, right? So the idea is that from that you align yourself with the world, right? So to understand that this is not the backwaters or some remote region which is like, somewhere in the boondocks, right? The hinterland, the periphery. But that our experiences also matter, that we are all the same, to kind of get that universal story of struggle, conflict everywhere. I think people should definitely read this. And I must tell you, Janubeba, again, coming back to your work, the whole idea of exploring the conflict from within the household, from within stories of these specific women, especially, that's something that I love doing myself, and I love reading in other people's writings. And I have actually been working on that as an academic, also working on gender and conflict. So I think there are so many different perspectives that people can get from reading this anthology, right? You can approach it from the point of view of gender, from, looking at how power works in the peripheries and things like that. So thank you, Aruni, for bringing everybody together to tell their stories and to tell our stories.
I think, if you remember this, what happened last year around, who is an Assamese, who are outsiders. And I think this anthology should be essential reading. Not only in university spaces where we have, readings and secondary readings, etc., but it works. I think, we've been talking about really heavy stuff, identity, who we are, language, politics, etc. But also as just stories, they work so well, just stories. If you're going to give it to a lay person without, someone who is sitting maybe in Allahabad, this, set of stories, I think they work as stories too, which I think is really important because, of course, we have an agenda, we have an ideology, we have, we are trying to put forward a certain, idea around conflict, around identity, etc. But we also telling stories, and I think that's important. That's why you have to read this at top.
I think I said it in the last section, but I'll say it again. In that, when you read fiction, you get a subtler, finer feel of the politics of a region than reading a textbook, an article, or an essay. And the best way to do it through this anthology is because it's written in different languages. You have the Indian writing in English, we have us writing in English, you have it in Assamese, you have it in Bodo. And the niceties, the complexities, the finer points come out so beautifully, so you can read it and judge for yourself. This is, like you said, Aruni, a sneak peek, a glimpse, a sort of small window into the problem or into the beauty or the that Northeast is all about. And as Nitu said, recommended reading, definitely universities, colleges, definitely would be a good idea. And also everybody else who wants to understand this very beautiful, complex part.
Thank you so much for coming together today. I know, Jahani Borua, you have a different panel to attend after this, but I just wanted to send you gratitude from Georgia with a lot of love. Thank you for contributing to this anthology. Thank you for coming together and talking to each other, talking to me about this anthology. And, I must say, this is probably the first, panel where where we discuss Assamese English writing in some ways, right? So I wanted to put in that little question, though we are talking about the anthology, because I thought that, all of us, this is what binds us. So that is why I wanted to sort of ask you all of those questions. And all of you are so generous with your time, with your answers. And we have a very, very long panel. And I think a lot of people will find this interesting. Thank you very much. And I hope we can do this again.